Cheers, queers! Today on the Big Gay Agenda, we are talking to filmmaker Shea Vassar about their upcoming short film, Julie Takes a Walk, a queer native rom-com that blends humor, identity, and self-discovery. Welcome to the podcast, Shea.
Thank y'all for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
We're super excited to hear more about this project because it sounds amazing. So first question for listeners at home that may not be aware of the project, can you tell us a little bit about what Julie Takes a Walk is about?
Sure. Yeah. So Julie Takes a Walk is a romantic comedy in the very stereotypical idea of the genre. What makes it different is it's queer. And I really love that. But basically, Julie is a woman in her 30s who, on her wedding day at her big Italian American wedding, is told she's adopted. So she runs off to a small town and she immediately has connection with Cass the bartender, who is hot, very hot. And so not only did she just learn she's adopted, she also is like, am I attracted to a woman? And that is kind of the setup of this.
Oh my god.
It sounds perfect.
A quarter-life crisis at its finest.
Exactly. And we all know what I think that moment of instant connection with someone is. And especially if you've been raised in a certain culture or religious upbringing that doesn't allow for you to crush on someone, you're like, but this doesn't feel wrong. So how is it wrong? Yeah.
Yeah. Love all of that.
What inspired you to write Julie Takes a Walk?
Well, I've always wanted to be a comedy writer. I moved to New York back in 2016. I only had my associate's degree, and I really thought that if I sat at 30 Rock long enough, that Lauren Michaels would just hire me. So did not work. I had to get a barista job, and then I was like, okay, maybe I should get the rest of my degree. And so I went to Hunter College in the city, and I got a film degree. And that was when I thought I wanted to do more academia and look at the way that especially women are portrayed in film. I got really obsessed with the doppelganger theory. Of course, Mulholland Drive was a big motivating factor, and it was showing at every theater in New York at midnight. So I had all this crazy vibes, and this is the first Trump administration, right? And so it's there was a whole different energy around what it was like to embody who you are. And I've written a couple of different pilots because ultimately I want to be a TV producer and writer. And Julie Takes a Walk actually started as a pilot episode. And so I picture this as a 6 to 8 episode miniseries that kind of dives into both characters in a much deeper way. But obviously that's expensive. So after I got into the Sundance Institute's Native Lab with the pilot episode. I was the 2024 artist in residence with that program. And so with the original pilot script, and that came with a little bit of money. And I was like, well, you know what people are not buying right now? Television shows about gay natives. And so I'm going to make a proof of concept because something that I've really come across is that so often, especially because it's white male executives are in these positions, they're like, there's no audience for this. And I'm like, you guys obviously are not on Reddit. I'm sorry. You do not know that there is an audience for this. So basically, I'm going to prove to them that there is by making this short proof of concept that really embodies this story, which also, going back to what you said, what inspired you? I am Native and I am adopted, and so I was raised by my Irish American dad and his second wife, and so it was never a big deal to me to be Native. It was just this fun fact I had about myself. At a party, you would pull out the card that the government gives you and be like, I bet you've never seen a Native American before, because I made a joke out of it because I didn't know what to do with it. It was such this awkward identity thing that no one taught me about. It was just weird. And so when I moved to New York, I dived more into that identity, and Julie Takes a Walk really takes elements of those feelings in that journey and makes it a completely fictional story in order to really explore very similar feelings to how I kind of came into myself as a queer Cherokee woman. So long-winded answer to say a lot inspired this.
I mean, everything that we learn about this project sounds amazing. And I did immediately, I was like, this sounds like a good TV show plot. I'm like, I kind of want more and just more and more. And I haven't even seen anything yet.
I love hearing that because for me, it's so naturally a TV story, right?
Yeah, like literally, I would eat this up in 5 seconds. Everything about it. So it's interesting to hear that this was based on many things, partly your, personal experience, but also in the description, you've mentioned that there's influences from other media, for example, like Runaway Bride, Desert Hearts, Fancy Dance. What specific elements from those films shape the vision for Julie Takes a Walk?
Yeah, thank you for asking because this is going to be another long-winded answer. I am all about aesthetics, and as a producer, I feel like that's kind of like your job is to really have this vision of a aesthetic world, right? And so the original pilot was written to be set in 1999. I felt like that was a year that I kind of remember because I was a child, but I think what was so interesting about 1999 is it was such a shift and dichotomies. But also, what is so interesting is as someone who grew up in Oklahoma, we got everything late. So 1999 in Oklahoma, because we didn't have quite the same cultural influence, we're getting everything from the coast like 10 years later. So 1999 to me, obviously, I wasn't alive in the 80s to compare. It still has a lot of elements of the 80s, maybe even the 70s, right? Because it's a lot slower culture. And so I started looking at Americana. And that's where Desert Hearts is really just to me such a vibey film because it's made in the 80s, but about the 50s. But yet you still see elements that are so alive and so real to the 80s. And what I love about that movie is it shows the struggles of, again, this idea of like, I think I'm falling in love with a woman for the first time and I don't really know how to go about this. And sure, both of them have like people who are not for being gay, but ultimately they like fight through that and like understand that. And that's in the 1950s. Even though it was like made in the 80s, it's bringing 1980s like belief systems into the 50s. And so I kind of wanted to do that reclamation with Julie Takes a Walk. Runaway Bride is definitely when one of my producers rewatched it, she was like, this is one of the most misogynistic movies. It is super misogynistic. But I think it's actually hilarious how like no one addresses like any of the big trauma in the film. Like her dad is an alcoholic. She has a fear of commitment and she's just become this butt of the joke because she keeps running away from men. Okay, there's a different movie in Runaway Bride than like that. And so I want to kind of do a retelling of Runaway Bride. Bound is another one that I throw in there because there's something about the like sapphic longing between the two of them. And while this film has nothing to do with any kind of like illegal activity at all, like this is very Americana based, very like almost like slow cinema, but not, because I want it to be very funny and ironic and zany. The longing that you feel between those two women when they're just like that subtext. And so I really want both of my actors playing these leads to study that subtext, right? Because there's certain things that you can watch as a queer person and pick up on that straight people will never pick up on. And that's what I want in Julie Takes a Walk, is where this feels very beautiful. It's a beautiful love story, but it's on a whole different level if you experience what it's like to fall in love with a woman before, or someone that you've been told your whole life that if you have these feelings, it's wrong or sinful. And last is Fancy Dance. Erica Tremblay does a really great job at kind of capturing that feel of Oklahoma in a way that, again, it feels like you're somewhere in the 80s or 90s, despite it being present day. And also, I think the character that Lily Gladstone plays is just so naturally herself, despite being a little bit out of place for being a butch character in this small town Oklahoma, right? And so I really like when I was really developing cast, the romantic interest, I really studied Lily Gladstone and Fancy Dance and Certain Women, because both of those have this quiet confidence that I think really happens when you realize that you're gay or that you're queer or bi, and you're like, I'm confident about it, but also people are not going to react the same way I want them to in these situations, which is like what certain women is about. It's like, these grand gestures that, like, if a man did it, it would be great, but if I as a, a ranch hand do it, it's kind of creepy, but why? And so all of that kind of mixes together to be this like aesthetic Frankenstein monster of a rom-com. And it's really fun to like I'm constantly making mood boards and like, finding little elements in different cinema that I'm like, oh, I need to like write that down so the cinematographer can see what that shot like said. And we technically have like a car stunt scene, but we're doing it very like Hitchcock Truffaut, where it's like the car and the man are never gonna meet, but we're gonna give the element, right? And that's what like the Hitchcock shower scene did. No knife to skin ever happens, but we think she's been stabbed. That's also a filmmaking hack for lower insurance, because if we don't have a real stunt, we pay a lot lower insurance. So we are kind of mixing a more straightforward way of filmmaking with a little bit more of the guerrilla. We need to save money for this kind of thing. But I think this is really just a love letter to romance on screen, and unfortunately we just don't get a lot of happy sapphic love stories where it's like, oh, even if they've been through trauma, they are still human people that have all this happiness as well, or they have these ways that they found to survive. So why aren't we focusing on that instead of the way their community has rejected them?
I can tell that this project is going to be quite humorous, and I'm very, very excited. I know I just keep saying that, but again, it just sounds amazing. But so why did you choose to explore like identity through a romantic comedy rather than dramatic? I know you just said that you want to show happiness, but the
Yeah,
genres.
I think, the intersection of so many of my identities are found in this, being adopted and being native, and being queer. And so often I feel like any stories that have even just one of these identities are sad. And I'm already sad enough about what I've been through. I would love to have some dark humor to feel that cathartic energy that we all have. I mean, even as a stand-up comedian, which I do mostly so that I can practice my comedy writing, you get feedback. You also get a taste of what an audience knows and doesn't know, right? Because we're usually so in our own circle that I'll say references, pop culture references, and realize no one knows them. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm the only one that knows this specific thing. It's not as universal as I feel. And so with stand up, people thought I was crazy when 6 weeks after my mom died, I started performing stand up about my mom. And it was the only way I could feel okay at the time, because I was tired of the whole like, oh, if you want to talk, like call me, or I'm so sorry for your loss, all of these. And I get it. People don't really know what to do or say in these situations. And so sometimes I think the best thing to do is just to make a joke of it. And I know that's not a popular idea for people. I have had people who have ran out of me talking about my mom's death crying, and I do always feel really awful, but this is the way that I have felt normal after that monumental loss. And I think that's the same way with trauma, because trauma is a form of loss. And so I think if we can normalize that these things happen and that people are sad or they're weirded out by them or numb, and the only way that they can cope with what life gives us is humor, I think that's really where healing exists. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for films that focus on the trauma aspects of these identities, but I don't think we have enough like lowbrow media. And a lot of times too, people that are like say homophobic or any of that, my hope is that they can watch a film like this and be like, wait, these are just people. Wait, they don't even want to make out, they just want to look at each other. It's like it humanizes us to a whole different level of like, wait, we're human. Why are you guys dehumanizing us when that's just not right? Like, don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the
Yes.
message that the world needs right now, particularly America. So yeah, thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That too. I mean, obviously, I started writing this like 2 years ago where things were bad. They were bad, but they weren't what we have now already experienced in a couple weeks of 2025. And
Yes.
so it has felt a little weird to be like, people are dealing with, the California fires or anything. And I'm over here crowdfunding this. But at the same time, I think in a moment like this, art helps fuel revolution and change, because if we only are talking about the bad things that are happening to us, we will all burn out. And what is so important for artists at this time is to create art that reflects the time, but also allows people who are maybe on the front lines or who are more at risk than myself or other communities. They have something that they can like say, hey, I can tune out for 30 minutes just to recharge. And I think that's like something that we as like community members need to normalize. Is it's like it's okay if you need to go take a 2-hour nap and like not talk to anyone the rest of the day because you're too plugged in, like that's okay. And so I think that's what's really important about art during these times that do feel heavy and rough. It's like it's a way to where it's we can say, hey, like it's okay to set that down for 10 minutes and just remember that you are also human and like you also have to take care of yourself.
Yeah, that's a really important message I hope everyone's listening to at home. Joy can also just be a form of resistance in and of itself
Yes.
as well. So, yes, this brings all the elements of everything we kind of need right now. So, again, thank you for conceptualizing this
Of
now. I think it's important
course.
now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but speaking of like art and like perspective and things like that. So in general, unfortunately, like queer native stories are still vastly underrepresented in media and particularly mainstream media. What does it mean to you to bring this specific perspective to the screen through this film?
Yeah, I think what's so interesting is again, I didn't set out to write like necessarily a queer native story. I had someone reach out who acts in a lot of big native films, and they were like, "I'm tired of doing just trauma. Like, would you write a rom-com and it features a girl going back to the res?" And I was like, "Sure." And again, because of my upbringing, I don't have that stereotypical like res experience. Like technically I grew up on the res, but like in Oklahoma, especially the eastern side, there's a lot of politics around that because there was a 2020 Supreme Court decision that basically reaffirmed that half the state of Oklahoma is still reservations. And so there was like time for me to kind of reclaim being like, just because I was raised by white people, I still have that connection to the land that childhood me understood, because there is that body memory and understanding. Even if no one was like, yeah, you are a native kid, I can still reclaim that childhood. And of course, I'm mindful of the fact like I'm not going to tell stories I'm not informed about or any of that. But as I started kind of trying to develop the main character, I was like, she's so gay. Like she's so gay. Like I know I have her getting married to this guy, and that like, again, it was the same concept of like she's gonna leave the aisle, run away from the aisle, and run to the res. It was very like The Notebook, right? Like she's gonna fall in love with a guy there, and then it's gonna be like, do I go back to who I used to be as an Italian American, or do I like follow this hot native guy? And I was like, I don't think this is a guy. Like I don't think this is a. It just doesn't. I think we need to up it. And again, I think part of that is because I am a queer writer, but I also think that it's like I didn't set out to necessarily tell a queer story, but like it just happened, And I think that a lot of times with our identities and with the idea of identity politics, right? It's like so many people are like, "Oh, you have to have a label for everything." And it's like, not necessarily. Like I don't wear all my labels very openly. They just naturally come into everything I do. And I think that's such a misunderstanding about identity. And so, yeah, like I can write a story or, do a retelling of a white girl and all of that. But I think there's always going to be elements that come out because of who I am and who I am as a writer, first and foremost. So it's interesting. I've tried not to, isolate myself into these communities, again, mostly for the industry's sake, right? Because the moment you get labeled something, you're kind of stuck there, especially if you're not a white cis male. Like that is kind of, they get to do whatever they want. Like they get to write about whatever they want. We have stories, from white cis men about all of our identities. But when it's reversed and the further you are away from that, the harder it is to convince studios and executives that what I'm doing is different and not just for a community that fits my identities, because there's universal stories in all of this. I mean, this feeling of belonging, or cultural identity that maybe you don't know, or sexuality. And sexuality isn't only limited, like, I think this is so silly. Sexuality isn't just limited to the queers. We're not the one, like, we don't, sexuality is a beautiful thing that all people can experience the fullness of. And whether or not that's because they don't have like this sexual pressure as the way that like some of our ace friends do, like it is still part of our desire as a human, right? And so it's like, it's so funny that people see like a queer film or a queer show and they're like, oh, it's just for the gays. It's like, no, 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 no. Like, I know gay people that love Frasier. Like, talk about a white straight show, They made poor, you know, Niles into a straight character when that was obviously not. That was obviously not. So it's like, I love that people try to put me in a box. And I think you just have to keep resisting it and keep resisting, what Beyonce said at the Grammys, where she said, like, I'm probably poorly paraphrasing, but genre is made to like keep us down. It's to hold us back. And I think that's so true. And also, identity is not a genre. This is a rom-com first and foremost. And as much as I want like to have my, queer audience members feel like this is something that they can be a part of and all of that, it's also a rom-com. I'm sorry, I watched 13 Going on 30 as a kid and had no attraction to either of the men, but I related to the story. So rom-coms are universal because we all have these messy moments in life. Whew. Anyway, all of that to say, I am very long-winded, but it's because I have so much like passion for this project. So I really appreciate that y'all are letting me just like gush over how much I love this project.
It's your
That is what the podcast is here for.
That's why we're here.
Well, thank you.
Please,
I
hear
really
us talk
appreciate
enough.
it.
One day we will be watching this film and
Yes.
gushing over it and
Right.
dissecting it on
For
the
many hours,
podcast.
yeah.
So
Yay!
yes.
It is very exciting. And I think that is why it's exciting, is like I want people to get excited for it even in this stage, because I want community to feel like a part of it. And I'm hosting a fundraiser show in Tulsa. And that's originally where I'm from, is like the Tulsa area. And so I haven't been there in a while. I haven't lived there in a while, but I'm decently connected with some community there. And I feel like it's important to do fundraiser shows or events that get the community there involved, because I don't want this to be made in an echo chamber. I want this to be made with this feeling of other people feel like they have even a piece of it, because I think that's what's so special about filmmaking, is it is collective. It's not, I don't sit here and paint by myself. I write something and then I bring on people to help something big and beautiful and expensive. I think filmmaking is also a very expensive medium, which is why I want it to be a collective experience. I want everyone to feel like, they have given a portion and they're going to get back more than what they gave in, and not just in donations, but shares or opportunities like this. It's like, I think that's what independent filmmaking used to be, and unfortunately we've been kind of bought out or ran out because there's not enough space for this kind of like loving collective experience, and that's what I'm focused on. So
That's wonderful. I
thanks.
again cannot wait for all of it to happen. I know you are focusing more on the rom-com aspect of the film and not just, you don't want it to be focused on identity, but are there any misconceptions about Native and queer identities that you hope this film helps challenge?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, so Cass is like the very butch Native bartender, right? That challenges Julie's identity even further. And when I was looking and developing Cass, I have a lot of empathy for her because she's in a situation where she is in her community and she's around her family some, but it's one of those things where she has kind of given up this want to fully be herself or maybe even date or be around women or be seen in that way because she knows that if she pushes to be fully herself, she'll lose community. And I think that's something that's really, really hard in the Native community is there because of colonization, there has been a lot of Christian values that have sunken in. And being a Cherokee woman, we are traditionally matrilineal, which means that like you kind of went with the clan that your mom, and so you were raised with more of your like mom's family. And also, women made a lot of the decisions. Men might go to war, they might do that, but nothing was made decision wise without women. Women also were able to divorce men in a way that men could not. Like it had to be the women who were like, I'm done with this guy, you know? So when I look at these values that we had traditionally, and then I hear things about Wilma Mankiller was our first woman chief of my tribe, and she was met with so much misogyny from people in our tribe, you know, and it was mostly because of her just being a woman. And sure, that was the 80s and 90s, but that's still so alive in our communities today. And I hate that so much because traditionally this is not what a Cherokee value would allow. And I think there has been a pushback against that, just as, you know, the umbrella term of like two spirit has been embraced, and this understanding that there are certain identities or aspects of queerness in our communities that we might have lost because of colonization and this want to be to fall more into an assimilative Christianity. And I see it coming back, but I think that's why I give so much empathy to Cass, as her writer, as the one who it's like crazy. I feel like I know these people despite me being the one who made them. Like I created them in my head, but Cass is someone who she is basically sacrificing ever being in love essentially to to have community and have her family. That doesn't mean that she dresses like she's not gay. It's like one of those things where like it's very understood she's gay, but people just don't bring it up, you know? Like it's literally a don't ask, don't tell situation.
Yeah.
But she's like wearing like, you know, tight white t-shirts when her hair back, and like she works on cars and she loves reading. She's just like to herself, you know, because she's just like, okay, no one else is gonna get me. So I think that's one of the biggest things. The other thing is, and I mean, this will never be known if this doesn't make it to TV. So but I'll go ahead and say it now is Julie is from a community that is actually a very real community here in Oklahoma, and it's called the Little Italy of Oklahoma. I grew up going on day trips there to get Italian food, and it's called Krebs, Oklahoma. And you walk into these places in Krebs, and you know they have like framed pictures of Reba McEntire, and like it's almost like a New York Italian restaurant, but in a small town in Oklahoma. And it's on the Choctaw Nation, and so that's the community that Julie is from. But she's adopted, obviously, and in the longer scheme of things, she actually finds out she is Native, and that's something that, you know, again, as someone who embraced their Native identity much later, it really is kind of like the biggest hurricane in your brain that you're like, oh my gosh, like I look like this, but I'm Native. Like, and people do push back because there has been so many people who have falsely claimed Native identity and taken advantage of that, right? Like that is something that unfortunately our communities are constantly going through. And so the imposter syndrome that you feel when you're like, wait, I belong to this community, but I don't. And so I think, you know, add on top of it, she's also going through this like queer journey, or, you know, this longing for a woman that she's like, what is going on? And so that's something that I want to deeply get into as like, again, hopefully fingers crossed someone picks this up for, I would love 6 episodes at the least. You know what I mean? Like I'm pitching myself here too, but Because we would get a whole episode about, Julie kind of finding this out of, wait, I'm not just an Italian American from the other side of the state. I'm actually, oh my god, because then it's just another layer. And honestly, that's what my 20s felt like, is it was like constantly like, oh yeah, you thought you were done with your like understanding yourself. Here's another bomb. And you're like, cool. Okay, just got to deal with it. So I think being able to showcase and kind of use both these characters as a foil of what the Native like queer experience can look like, I think is really important, because um this is unfortunately too common, where people don't feel like they fully fit in for whatever reason. And for Julie, it's going to be because she's like a late Native woman, like she's just now finding out. And for Cass, it's that not wanting to lose that cultural identity to embrace her sexuality. And um yeah, yeah, not to say there aren't, like, I see families nowadays who are doing a lot better at embracing, like their trans kids and things. And there really is a revival, I think, of this traditional understanding of like identity and sexuality and that in our community. But there's still a lot of bigotry, and I hope to kind of combat that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So from listening to like basically that explanation, there seems like there's a lot of like cultural elements in this story based on not just who the characters are, but like the setting. So I'm learning a ton about Oklahoma just by hearing you talk about this, because I'm not from Oklahoma. Um, so I guess like I just I don't know how this would work, but if like, the story wasn't set in Oklahoma, like how would that change, I guess, this story? Because it seems like it's got a good dichotomy of like, here's this side of Oklahoma where like you have Little Italy and all these kinds of stuff, and then now we're gonna go to like, how would you changing the setting change your story?
I don't think the story could be told somewhere else.
I don't
And
think so either.
and that's what's so
It's
interesting. I mean,
interesting.
yeah, no, it's a great question, because, Oklahoma has a horribly dark history. And if I get a little too heady on this, I do like to brag. I have a master's of legal studies in Indigenous peoples law, so tribal law, essentially. So I can tell you Oklahoma was like a big part of my study, because it was a late state, but it was two different territories that came together to make one. And one of the territories was literally called Indian Territory. And that's where, and it's not just like the Cherokees who, my tribe got put on the Trail of Tears to Indian Territory. It was a lot of different tribes who just got pushed into this side. And there was actually a campaign to make a Indian only state, which Indian is still the legal term. So if you ever go to law, and we do have like a political and different like standing. It's, again, all of this is very convoluted and messy. But basically because they wanted to kill us off. And then when that didn't happen, they forced us into assimilation. And so that's where you get a lot of these very like horrible laws, to say that lightly. But essentially they tried to get the 46th state to be the state of Sequoia. So it would have been an Indian only state. And that was not accepted. And a year later we had Oklahoma, which was Indian Territory and Oklahoma Territory put together. And so I think, and that happened in 1907. And then, of course, with Killers of a Flower Moon, more people know about what happened to the Osage in 1921. And that was, or around that time, it was going on longer than a year, unfortunately. But it was also 1921 is the same year that the Tulsa Race Massacre happened. So a lot of the land here holds this trauma. And I think if you were to set this anywhere else, you would have to change the characters completely, because even Native people who are maybe still on their homelands have a different connection with the land than, say, I do. As a Cherokee person who, my homelands, I actually know my Cherokee family comes from what is now Chattanooga, Tennessee area. And so, like, I have a different connection to Chattanooga than maybe people who even are born and raised in Chattanooga, right? Like, because I have this like special ancestral connection. And weirdly enough, I also have that to Oklahoma, even though it's not technically my homelands, because my family had to come here. It was part of a legal legislation that Andrew Jackson passed. But so I think that's what makes this story so rich, is that there's a lot of trauma here in Oklahoma, and we see it still in the legislation that's trying to be passed. We see it in the way that, we don't have a big population despite being a pretty decent size landmass of a state. And, every election, presidential election, we've gone red since I want to say 2008. Like like we have a very unique history here. So I want that to come through, but again, through that more like darkly funny, like situational comedy than through this idea of like, oh yeah, the land here is tainted. It's like, no, the land here is traumatized, unfortunately. And, the only way that we can heal it is to heal ourselves. So yeah.
You seem to figure out a great perspective on how to keep it, like the humor in it with all these things going on. You definitely know what you're talking about. You're more than qualified to make this film.
Thank you.
How has crowdfunding gone on Seed and Spark so far?
It hasn't gone bad, especially because, I'm not asking necessarily my friends that pass around the same $20 to donate. Like, and and that's been hard, right? Because it's like, I want my community to be a part of it, but I also don't want them giving me their last $10 when we are in this economic time. What I'm targeting is people who are not necessarily struggling and want to be in this hard time a patron of the arts, right? Like that person exists in these times, and there are people that have the funds to support artists and to do it without strings attached. I think that's another big one. And I'm not going to jeopardize or compromise on my vision for investment. That's just not something I'm willing to do. So I've been really grateful for both the mix of large donations from people who are able to, but also I know that people who are making $5 and $10 donations are like really believe in this. And that's something that like I feel so grateful for in a way that I mean, I didn't know if anyone would donate, and it's like, because I do know that this is a little bit more complicated to explain. And that's why I really do appreciate y'all giving me the platform for this. Cause it's like, you're right. It is very deep. And, there's a whole root system to this story that I feel like I can't say in just a synopsis on Seed and Spark, but it's so important to me. And so it's like, yeah, it's been a little lower and slower than I thought, but like I'm not upset about it. We're living in dark times. Like, I'm okay with it, and we're going to keep persevering through. I mean, this film will be made no matter what. And that's what I keep telling everyone is this film's going to get made. So, if we got to figure it out ourselves, if I have to put up the rest of the money, like, well, I'll do it. Like that's fine. I don't have kids. I can spend this on a film, right?
That's your baby.
Exactly. No, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is my child. And what's great is it doesn't talk back. It's really expensive, but it's not mean to me. It's fulfilling. I get to talk to other people I like about it all the time, and no one's annoyed. So it's great.
True.
Well, if anyone listening, watching is able to and wants to donate to this amazing project, go to Seed and Spark and help support Julie Takes a Walk. We'll be checking it out soon.
Yeah. No, I'm hoping to get it. We have a tentative timeline for like we're shooting in April. I would love to get a first cut done by June 1, just so that we can, you got to pitch to like executive producers at that point and all that. All the icky political like film industry stuff that I'm like, I don't want to think about that. Like, I just want to make art. But I think this has been like exposure therapy to promoting myself and my art and to believing in something that is so much bigger than me. And I'm so grateful that I have been the person chosen to tell this story, because it really does feel like something universal while also being so specific. And yeah, I'm just really excited.
So we're kind of like early in the process of getting this basically project to screen. But so far along this journey, what's been the most rewarding moment for you putting this project together?
I think having the team I do really has been so rewarding, because so I've produced comedy shows in New York. I think I did 14 in total last year. I love producing, but I am a control freak and I'm neurotic. And so I know these things about myself and I don't want other people to be exposed to it. So I usually would produce on my own. And very rarely would I ask for help. Like, these like hyper independent qualities of mine are being challenged a lot. And I'm so grateful for the team that I have who are willing to push me a little bit out of my comfort zone and be like, no, we are here because we believe in this. You are allowed to ask us to email someone. Like, you don't have to push off we can do that. We can watch tapes. We can, promote on our own social media. Like, ask us. That's what we're here for. And to have a team that is so like willing to push me into that place of vulnerability that I really do need to be in, because I think that's the hardest part as an artist and again in a collective art form, is you have to rely on others. And when you've been in these situations before where you're like, I don't trust other people, or I don't want to be rejected, or I don't want to look like a crazy person. Like, these are of course the thoughts going through my head when I'm like, I need help, like reaching out to this person. And it's like, that's silly. You don't need to feel like a burden when you're asking for help. And and that of course is a life lesson for all people, not just people making a film, but it's something that it feels almost like an exposure therapy. And I'm very grateful for my team who are really giving me that safe space to explore what it's like to ask people for help. Because yeah, this is not a one night comedy show at a bar in Brooklyn. This is a multi-$1,000, project, and I need the help. And so yeah, it's okay to let down your hyper independence at times. I'm saying that to convince myself of that right now.
Manifesting.
Yes. I like look in the mirror and I'm like, it's okay. You're not alone. You can ask people for help. And I get in that moment, I'm like, oh, that's so icky asking people, but you got to do it.
It's funny because it's relatable.
Right. No, exactly. And that's the thing, is like, I think because like one thing that brings, I think, a lot of people under the queer spectrum together is this fact that we have had to deal with some kind of rejection because of who we are and not wanting to be vulnerable in ourselves. For me, I've learned I'm very loud and obnoxious. And for a long time, I hid that about myself because I just wanted everyone to like me. But then you have people who like you for not you. And so now I'm like, I'd rather people be around because they know I'm loud and obnoxious and they love it. So that's essentially what filmmaking is too.
I love it. Okay, so if you had an unlimited budget for this, what would be the first thing you added?
Oh, the first thing I'd add. Oh my gosh. This is so funny. I have this dream of working with Naomi Watts, and I would want to cast her as the mom. She's not even Italian American, but she could make it work, right? And it's funny. I wrote another pilot, which is loosely based off of my childhood. It's like Pin 15 meets Orange is the New Black. And I say that not to trauma dump on your podcast. I was raised in a very religious household, and I was from 15 to 18 in one of those like troubled teen industry programs. And so I have this idea to write where I would basically play myself as a 15-year-old getting taken away. And then I would allow the other people I was in the program with to also play like staff members, like to have this cathartic like acting out. Because essentially that's what Pim 15 was. It's a show about two girls that were so nerdy that they played themselves at 30 years old to like reimagine their middle school years for humor. And so I wrote the mom in that specifically for Naomi Watts. But yeah, I want to I don't know what it is about. It's probably all that Mulholland Drive I watched.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That's what it is. I love Naomi Watts.
There it is.
So yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
I have mommy issues, so I love a good older actress. But Naomi Watts is up there for my number one.
Love it.
I'm just curious, who, like, if you had any, who inspired you, if any, to, like, along your filmmaking journey? Were there any like filmmakers or creators that were influential to you, like as you kind of are in your career?
Well, I'm really influenced by Agnes Varda, who obviously made like a lot different films. I think she really found her element when she started making and focusing on documentary. But I love the way that she always talked about being a woman in the industry. Um, and she again, I have no memory, so I can never quote anyone word for word, but she basically had this quote about how like, oh, when I was on film sets, people would call the director like, sir or mister, and I just want to be Agnes. I'm not here to recreate the same hierarchy that a male set does. I'm here to make art. And she always has had like that feeling. I mean, even when her and Jacques Demy moved to LA, he was making a film that was a total bomb, but it's really good. It's called The Model Shop, if you could ever get a hold of it. And she went into a interview with someone important and basically went off on him because he was being misogynistic, and she never worked in Hollywood. And I think we're seeing a lot of that kind of come back, right? Like this woman energy to be like, no, you're not gonna do that to me. You're not gonna call me names. You're not gonna belittle me or not believe in my project or take, a concept and make it into something that I don't agree with. And I think we need that pushback because unfortunately, anyone that's not a white cis male gets this pushback in this industry. And the only way we can create change is to push like against that. Is to be like, no. And again, it might cost you political relationships or deals, but in my opinion, I would rather not get a deal with a big company because I told a guy that he was being misogynistic, which I would. I would definitely go off on a guy if he said something bad or whatever. But I don't want to prioritize politics over, and by politics I mean industry politics, over my art. And I think that's something that we have to continue to push back about and create space for true art. The biggest problem we've had is art being now called content. And I'm not making content. I will never call myself a content creator or any of that. I'm an artist. I'm a comedy writer first and foremost. So most of the time I'm just trying to make people laugh, and feel alive and feel like it's okay to be human. And so Agnes Varda. And then I think in the same way, that same attitude is really coming out with like Chapel Roan these days, the way that she's pushed back against people calling her names, or even the latest thing where some dude called her out in an op-ed and she's like, okay, well here, I'm going to donate $25,000. Like, you going to match me? Like you said, put my money where my mouth is. Here you go. And I think for so long women have been critiqued, but often are told, oh, don't make a big deal out of it. Like just ignore it, ignore the haters. Sometimes I can't. And sometimes I have to push back and show them that I am going to put my money where my mouth is. I am going to put my social capital where my mouth is. And you're not that critical to men like that. So let, non-binary filmmakers and women filmmakers and queer filmmakers do what they want, because they probably have a vision that you just can't conceptualize because your brain is too small. So and this is why no one has picked up my TV show, okay?
Not yet.
Exactly. Not yet. I have to say, I love you and everything about this. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. No, I again, if we had this interview like 2 years ago, I really think turning 30, like it really, my mom used to always tell me, like, you're going to get to a point where you don't care what people think about you.
Yes.
And it was literally like algebra clicking, right? It's like, okay, I don't worry as much. I'm going to wear what I want. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to say what I want. And sure, I'll be accountable to those actions, to my community and to people who I love and trust and have that relationship to. But like, I got to do this for me and my community first and foremost,
Oh, we
my
know.
mom currently tells me that every single day. So I'm looking forward to that day where I do not care.
Hey, I say that. I'm still an 80-20, like I talk a big game, and it's probably because I put eye makeup on today? And I was like, yes, girl. But like most days I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, no one likes me. And I'm like, oh, shut up. Like it's getting annoying, right? You're like, I don't want to care about this anymore because our individualism is part of that like collaborative, right? Like we would not be who we are without our community, and our community would not be who they are without who we are. And so we have that duty to community to be true to ourselves. Again, this is all stuff that I like tell myself so that I will do it. I talk a big game and I am practicing, okay? But that's what you got to do. Practice makes perfect. You're good.
That's right. Well, those are all the questions we have for you today. We appreciate everything. Before we kind of like sign off today, how can our listeners at home follow you, support the project? Let us know.
Yeah. So if you want to follow me on any social media, my @ is just Shea, Shea, Vassar, Vassar, except on Letterbox, and I never give that one out. But if you find it, you can follow. I will follow back. And the other way is Julie Takes a Walk. We are trying to build an audience on Instagram again to show later that we have an audience and that it's there, it's built in, and that is @ Julie Takes a Walk, just as it is. So, and Seed and Spark. But I think right now, the biggest thing is just to interact with us on social media because that helps get the project out.
All right. Yeah. Go follow, like all the things. And we will be anticipating this coming out and being a thing so we can talk about it again because it sounds so good. And thank you again, Shea, for taking the time to talk to us. We really appreciate it. This has been really fun.
No, I appreciate y'all so much. I love this space, and it's really been the first time I get to just like gush about how much I love this project that has been taking up my brain for like 2 years now. So,
well, we loved hearing what was inside your brain. It was great. All right. So for everybody at home, thanks for tuning in. And until next time, hydrate for lesbian Jesus.
And gay it up all over the place.
Bye.
Bye.
And with that, we've been Big Gay Energy. If you like this episode, check out all our other episodes right here on YouTube.
Please like, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more amazing super gay content.